Okay, in the previous video, I went over and explained kind of the general idea of how RPCs work and for things such as our player's movement and how we would want to go about performing our shooting and projectiles and having them being seen by everyone, the server and other clients and all that kind of stuff. Because currently, from where we left off in the previous video, if I shoot on the client, the server doesn't see the projectile, but if I shoot on the server, the client sees the projectile, and that's what we're going to be dealing with. So if we come over here to our beginner multiplayer character, scroll down to our onFire function, this is performed on the client, well, the shooting client. So if the server performs this, it's calling spawn actor, and it's creating the actor, and if the actor is set to replicate, which we made our projectile in the previous video replicate, it will then trickle down to all the other connected clients and, well, do its thing. So in our case, it applies an impulse using the projectile movement component to act as a bullet. So, well, just some form of projectile. So we need to make this, when we fire on the client, move all the way to the server to spawn the actor. So if we head over here to beginner multiplayer character.h, just our header file of the character, go down to our onFire function, we're going to create what's called a server RPC. So I'll explain the differences and the types here in a second, but the syntax for that is ufunction, then the type of RPC, which in our case it's server, then we can do reliable or unreliable, then we want to do with validation. So after that, we want to go ahead and create our function, and depending on what they are, I always index them accordingly. So since this is a server RPC, I'm going to do void server underscore, then the function name. So I'm going to do server underscore on fire. Now, I want this to take in two parameters, being the location and the rotation of the client's muzzle. So if we look right here, we get our spawn rotation for, well, in our on fire function, we get the rotation that we want to spawn the projectile and the location. So location being related to the muzzle. So we're going to pass our rotation and location into that function. So it's going to take in an F vector, and it's going to be called location, and then an F rotator, and it's going to be called rotation. Now that corresponds to the types of spawn rotation and spawn location. Next up, we need to add our validate function, and that returns a boolean. So we're going to do bool server underscore on fire, same name. Then we're going to do underscore validate. And then the parameters are going to be the exact same thing, location and rotation. Lastly, we need the implementation. So I'll explain these here in a second. So void server underscore on fire underscore implementation, and then the same parameters. So let's go ahead and create the implementation for the validate function. Like so, you can do this quickly by pressing Alt Enter, generate implementation. Good to go there. So we have them placed right underneath our onFire function. So the validate function. Let's see, what's a good way to explain this? So essentially it's a boolean is what what this function returns. So if I do return true, and I call this from the client, so I do, let's pretend I'm on the client right now, and I do something and it calls the function server underscore on fire. I'm just going to zero these out. Zero vector, yeah, and F rotator, zero rotator. So let's say I do something, and on the client, I call the function server underscore on fire. So I go from the client to the server. Well, when the validate function runs, if whatever we're validating, if we return true, the call will continue on and it will run whatever is inside of server underscore, well, the implementation. If it returns false, it will essentially disconnect the calling client. So it'll kick the client from the server. That's the way you can kind of think of it. So this is where you would do, some of your cheat protection, for example, for like very broad tolerances. So where if it's not even remotely close to where even like lag or something wouldn't be compensating for it, you could just say screw it and return false. Get that guy out of here. More than likely he's trying to cheat or do something stupid. So like if something goes over X value, for example, for whatever reason, just little things like that. So that pretty much prevents it from running anything or even calling the implementation. So but the way we use our RPCs, we don't actually call the validate or the implementation. What we do is we call the normal function. So in our case, server underscore on fire is what we would call when we want this RPC to run. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and I'm going to make it so in the implementation, I'm just going to print out a simple log. So UE log temp, warning, text. I'm just going to give it the name. Server on fire implementation has been called, like so. And then in our on fire function, let me just minimize our sound related stuff. When we do spawn actor, in the line right after that, I'm just going to simply go ahead and call that server RPC. So server underscore on fire. Then we take in the spawn location and spawn rotation, like so. Now let's go ahead and compile. And when the client and the server even, which we're going to have to do a check for that, which I'll explain here in a second. Okay, that means I probably spelled that wrong, which I did. So with validation, there we go. So we're going to want to do a check so the server does not call the server version of the function. We don't want that to occur. So let's go ahead and relaunch my game since high reload doesn't work for me at all. And neither does live plus plus. I don't know why. Okay, here we are. We have the log open. I play with two clients, and I want to shoot on the client. So if we watch the log at the bottom, we should see two logs where it says now firing on client and server on fire implementation has been called by this function call right here. So we successfully went from the client to the server. Now, there are cases where if you call a server RPC, it may not necessarily work, and that will be most likely related to ownership, and that is something we will be covering in a future video when I think we'll probably end up using projectiles or something like that to dive deeper into what we're trying to do. So anyways, we're not there yet. So we successfully went from the client to the server using our server RPC call. That's great. Now, when the server shoots, well, we're already on the server. Why is it calling the server RPC again? And it's essentially just kind of doing, two things of itself, even to some extent. Well, we need to do a check. So there's a couple different things that you can do. So I want to go ahead and remove this log actually in our on fire. We could do a couple of things. So if has authority, we want to do a check. So if we do not have authority, we will call server on fire. Now, I get a little confused sometimes with the authority, but my general takeaway is, here, we'll just kind of show you an example once it actually compiles. All right, so let's go ahead and give it a quick test and we'll go based off of the result. So I'm going to go ahead and do the client. I shoot, and our server function has been called. I go to the server and I shoot. It has not been called. So while we might be, for example, possessing this character with our player controller, authority kind of dictates whether or not we have authority over the actor that we're on. So this running on our client, for example, even though we might not necessarily be able to necessarily describe it, it just dictates whether or not we have network authority. So like if I hover over it, returns whether this actor has network authority. Another check we could do is if get world is server. So if we are not the server, then we want to go ahead and spawn it. I thought hot reload worked there for a second. Go figure, it failed though. So if we're not the server, call the server RPC. So I shoot, it works. I shoot on the client, on the server, and it doesn't get called. So it's the same kind of result. And the comparison is if get local role is less than role authority. So role authority is the highest value in the enum. So you can see right here, it is an enum enet role, has the value of 3. So there's a couple others. So role underscore, we have all of these. For instance, autonomous proxy has the value of 2. So role authority is greater than autonomous proxy. We're not going to get into this, but this dictates pretty much, okay, it's kind of the same thing as doing, for the most part, if has authority, to simplify it. Well, if we do not have authority. But anyways, we're going to leave this as if we do not have authority, to keep it simple. So if we do not have authority, what we're going to want to do is spawn our projectile. So we're already spawning the projectile in the on fire on the client. So let's just copy it, the entire line, just so we don't have to type it. Go to our implementation and paste it in. Now, we don't have reference to the world variable. So what we're going to do is just simply change it to get world. On location is changed with our passed in values. So location and rotation. Then we have our actor spawn parameters. So if we come up here, here's our spawn parameters, and the only thing that we're doing is changing the collision handling. So yeah, that's literally it for, I'm not sure why all it's really doing that, but we're gonna go ahead and paste our spawn parameters in, like so, and spawn our projectile. So now let's compile. And because this is spawning on the server, this should allow all of the clients to see this happen as well. Right, let's relaunch the editor real quick. We have 2 clients. So previously, we were never able to see the client's projectile on the server, but now when we shoot, we see it. However, as you can see on the client, 2 projectiles are spawning, but only 1 on the server. So now even if we test with 3, so we have our 2 clients being the 2 spawn windows right here, even all the clients see that we are firing. So we only have one issue though, and that is we are spawning a projectile on the client and the server. Really only want it to spawn, just not for ourselves. So there's a couple ways that we can go about actually kind of dealing with this. And I don't know if I really want to get into it right now, but for now, what we're going to do, we're simply going to remove the spawn actor from our on fire function. So highlight all that, our spawn actor parameters as well, and just remove it. So we're not going to deal with that right now. But one way we could resolve this is with either, well, we will be getting into multicast functions, multicast RPCs, as well on onRep variables. And when we get to those, we will kind of create a little workaround because I believe that'll be a good example to show you what those can do and their uses. So, as I said before, I will quickly explain the other types of RPCs because currently we're on the server. Well, we're doing a server RPC. So a server RPC, if you haven't been able to figure that out yet, when a client calls a server RPC, such as server underscore on fire, it will make the call and it'll run the code that is inside of the implementation on the server. Now, the other type is client, and this is the exact opposite. So on our multiplayer character here, let's say this just says client underscore on fire, for example. A client RPC goes from the server to the client. So if the server was to fire the client RPC on our beginner multiplayer character, or for example, the window to the left, this guy right here, it will run on the client, not the server or anywhere else. So that's kind of useful for if you want something to happen on a specific client. Now the other type is a net multicast. Now this is kind of like the client RPC, but instead of it being for one individual client, this will run on all connected clients wherever it is relevant. And we will get into relevancy later on as well. So a net multicast. The net multicast RPC must be called from the server. So if it is called from the client, it's just not really going to do anything. I don't even know if I don't think it even runs on the client. But let's say we're going to multicast our shooting, or not better yet, let's say we multicast a sound. So when we do play sound, that is going to be local. So even if we do, we play our fire sound on the server, it's only going to play on the server. It's not going to play for other clients, just like Spawn Actor does. So what we would want to do maybe is when we shoot, which we will be doing this later on too, we will want to play the sound on all the other clients. So that's also kind of the same deal as onRep, but we'll deal with that here in a second when we get to replicating variables. So that's when we would use something like a multicast, possibly. And same thing, because when a client shoots, we want all the players around them to hear the sound of the shot. We want it to see the effects. We want to see the muzzle flash. We want to see, depending on how you have it set up, the animation of the recoil, all of that kind of stuff. We want to see the bolt cycle, everything. So that way you can trigger it with a multicast, and you can have specific things occur in the multicast. So for example, if you ever saw my great shot devlog video, which I unfortunately have dropped that project, I had sound being dictated based off a distance. So when let's say someone is 1,000 meters away from another person. So client A is 1,000 meters from client B. If client A shoots their firearm, it's going to take a certain amount of seconds before client B hears it. Well, I executed that sound via a multicast function. However, in that multicast, I started a timer, and that timer simply had a delay that was calculated based off of the speed that sound travels. I cannot remember what that is. And after that time, so it gets the distance between client A and client B, calculates the total time it takes for the sound to get there, and that's the length of the timer. Once the timer decides, okay, that amount of time has elapsed, let's go ahead and call that function. It then plays the sound. So that gives it kind of the effect of sound, well, the speed of sound. So you can use multicast for a variety of things. that you want to happen now. There are some drawbacks to a multicast though, and we will be getting into those as well, such as you might say, hey, runs on all clients, great. So let's say you wanted to have a client open a door and that happened on all the other clients. Well, yeah, you can use a multicast. Well, you can use a multicast and that'll make it so the door, opens on all the clients where that door is relevant. Again, we'll get into relevancy later. However, let's say a client is not relevant or a client is not connected to the server at the time that the player decided to open the door and using the multicast. Well, when they come and run up to the door on their screen, they're going to see the door is closed because the multicast did not fire on their client. However, that can be resolved with onRep variables. And again, we'll be getting into that shortly. So those are pretty much replicated variables that the server has authority over that whenever they change, it will have a function that gets called on the client, all the connected clients. Well, clients were that actor that had the variable on it, the onRep variable on it is relevant. So anyways, I'm starting to dive a little farther into this, but I'm trying to kind of gradually explain it as we go on. And as always, if you have more experience with this and I make any mistakes, please uh, write them out and let me know in the comments, and I will pin it so other people can read it and hopefully learn from it. So anyways, how long have we been going on? 21 minutes of pretty much explaining myself over and over. Great. I'm going to go ahead and end this here. And what we'll be doing in the next video is we will start working with multicasts. So we will set that up with our shooting for now, and then I think we will move on to the example of using it with a door, like I was just discussing, so that way we can clearly see the difference between a door and an on-rep, well, the effects and drawbacks and stuff that they have. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. And as always, if you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, a link to my Patreon's in the description. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can find a link below that contains my Discord server. So, as always, I will see you in the next one. Take care.